Alright, before we begin, I need to do something I have never done at the start of an episode. I need to address the surprise. Because you clicked on this title, and you're sitting there right now thinking about what the surprise inside the rebuilt shed could possibly be. And I want to acknowledge that your imagination has probably already generated several scenarios, some of them creative, some of them dramatic, and at least one of them probably involving something alive. I'm not going to tell you what the surprise is at the beginning of the episode. You're going to have to earn it by staying with this story from the beginning, because the surprise only makes complete sense when you understand everything that preceded it. The surprise is not random. It is not gratuitous. It is the most precisely calibrated, most perfectly appropriate response to a specific act that I have documented in 4 years of covering HOA stories. It required planning. It required professional consultation. It required a specific kind of patience that most people do not have. And when you get there, when you understand what was inside that shed, I want you to think about how long it must have taken this man to plan it. Because the planning started, he told me, the morning after the fire. His name is Tommy. He is 49 years old. He lives in a suburb of Memphis, Tennessee, in a planned community called Ridgewood Commons. He is a residential electrician who has been running his own small electrical contracting business for 21 years. He is a man who knows how things are built, how they are wired, how they work, and how they fail. He is a man who, when he decides to build something, builds it right. He built a shed. The HOA president burned it down. He rebuilt it, with a surprise inside. Let me tell you everything. Welcome to the HOA files. Ridgewood Commons was developed 14 years before this story takes place in a suburb approximately 20 miles east of Memphis, Tennessee. It was built on land that had been agricultural, primarily soybean fields, and the developer had replaced the flat agricultural landscape with the standard suburban infrastructure of winding streets, cul-de-sacs, and a shallow grading that creates the appearance of topographic interest where the underlying land is essentially flat. The community had 128 homes, ranches, and two-story colonials in the $350,000 to $450,000 range. A pool, a small park with playground equipment, a community gazebo that was used for various events. HOA fees of $210 per month. It was not a remarkable community. It was comfortable and functional and maintained to a standard that the monthly dues supported without distinction. It was the kind of neighborhood that real estate listings described as established and well-maintained, and where children rode bikes and neighbors waved and nothing particularly dramatic was supposed to happen. Tommy had been in Ridgewood Commons for 9 years. He and his wife Denise had bought their home when their kids were young, motivated by the school district and a specific modest suburban peacefulness that they wanted for their family. Their son Tyler was now 17. Their daughter Jasmine was 14. Tommy was, by any reasonable description, a model HOA community member. His property was maintained meticulously, a consequence of his professional background, because an electrician who lets his own property look neglected is an electrician who sends a bad message to potential customers. His lawn was cut regularly. His gutters were clean. His exterior paint was in perfect condition. He had never received a violation notice in 9 years of residence. He had also, in 9 years, never had any particular relationship with the HOA board beyond his monthly dues payment and occasional attendance at annual meetings. He was not on the board. He had no ambitions to be on the board. He paid his dues, maintained his property, and expected the HOA to do what HOAs are supposed to do, maintain the common areas and enforce standards fairly. He had, as he told me, no reason to think about the HOA at all until the shed situation. The shed situation started the way so many HOA situations start, with something reasonable. Tommy had been wanting to build a workshop shed in his backyard for years. Not a decorative storage shed. A real workshop, a structure where he could maintain his electrical tools, work on projects, store his equipment, and have a dedicated professional space that was separate from the house. He was a working electrician. He had significant tool inventory. He needed a proper space for it. He had the funds. He had the professional skills to do the electrical work himself. He had a backyard that was large enough for the structure he had in mind without any encroachment on setback requirements or property boundaries. He had done his homework. He had measured. He had checked the county building code requirements. He had pulled up the Ridgewood Commons CC and RS and read the relevant sections on accessory structures. The CC and RS permitted accessory structures in backyard subject to Architectural Review Committee approval. The approval criteria specified that the structure must be consistent with the architectural character of the primary residence, must not exceed the height of the primary residence, must be finished in materials compatible with the home's exterior, must meet county setback requirements, and must include a brief description of the intended use. Tommy's proposed workshop shed met every single one of these criteria. He submitted a thorough architectural review application, complete dimensions, detailed drawings showing the proposed structure and how it related to the house's architectural character, materials list, vinyl siding in a color that matched the house, metal roof in a complementary tone, a description of the intended use as a professional electrical workshop and tool storage facility, site diagram showing setback compliance. He submitted the application and waited the 30-day review period. He received a denial. The denial stated that the proposed structure's size, which was 24 by 32 feet, exceeded what the committee considered appropriate for a residential backyard accessory structure. No specific maximum size was mentioned in the CC and RS. The denial cited the committee's discretionary authority to evaluate whether structures were consistent with community character. Tommy wrote back asking for the specific dimensional standard the committee had applied and requesting documentation of other approved accessory structures for comparison purposes. The response was that the committee exercised discretion on a case-by-case basis and that no specific dimensional standard was applicable. Tommy requested mediation under the community's governing documents. The mediator found that the CC and RS did not contain a dimensional standard for accessory structures and that the committee's denial had not been supported by any specific governing document provision. The mediator ordered the committee to approve Tommy's application as submitted. The HOA board president's name was Vivian. Vivian did not take mediation outcomes well. Vivian was 61 years old, a retired school district administrator who had been on the Ridgewood Commons HOA board for 6 years and president for the last 3. She ran the board with the specific organizational intensity of someone who had spent a career managing school district operations and who had brought her administrative sensibility to community governance with a thoroughness that exceeded what the position required. She was not, by the accounts of people who had worked with her in a professional context, a bad administrator. She was thorough and organized and genuinely knowledgeable about governance procedures. She had managed the HOA's finances responsibly, and the common areas were well maintained under her presidency. She was also a person with a strong sense of what the community should look like and a powerful discomfort with anything that deviated from her vision of it. Her vision was specific and somewhat narrow. Houses should look consistent. Yards should be neat, but not individualistic in ways that attracted visual attention. Accessory structures should be small and unobtrusive. The community should look like a set of variations on a theme rather than a collection of individual expressions. Tommy's proposed workshop shed, 24 by 32 feet with vinyl siding and a metal roof, was in Vivian's assessment too large and too industrial feeling for a residential backyard. The fact that it met every specified criterion in the CC and RS was, in her view, less important than the fact that it did not meet her aesthetic assessment of the community's character. The mediation outcome had legally required her to approve it. She had approved it formally, in writing, through the committee. But the approval had come with a specific quality of reluctant compliance that Tommy had noted and that had made him uncomfortable in a way he could not fully articulate at the time. He had gone ahead with the construction. He had hired a licensed general contractor to build the structure while doing all the electrical work himself. The shed had been completed over approximately 6 weeks. It was, by any objective measure, a very nice structure. The vinyl siding matched his house exterior precisely. The metal roof was in a complementary dark charcoal tone. The interior had been fitted with proper electrical panels, work lighting, dedicated circuits for tools, climate control, and all the professional workshop infrastructure that Tommy had been planning for years. He was genuinely proud of it. Denise called it Tommy's other house. Tyler had started spending time in it working on his own projects. It was a space the family used and valued. For approximately 7 months, nothing happened. No violation notices. No HOA communications. Just a working professional workshop in a residential backyard, exactly as designed and approved. And then it burned down. The fire happened on a Thursday night in October. Tommy was working late on a commercial electrical project about 20 miles from a house. Denise was home with the kids. She smelled smoke at approximately 10:30 in the evening and looked out the back window and saw the shed fully involved, flames visible through the workshop windows and through a gap that had developed near the roofline. She called 911. She got the kids out of the house as a precaution. She called Tommy. Tommy drove home in 17 minutes, a drive that normally took 25. The fire department was already on scene when he arrived. They had gotten the fire under control within approximately 40 minutes of the initial dispatch, but the shed was a complete loss. The structure was standing, but the interior was destroyed entirely. All his tools, all his equipment, all the electrical infrastructure he had installed with his own hands, all of it gone. The fire department's initial assessment indicated a possible electrical origin. Tommy, as a licensed electrician with 21 years of experience, knew his shed's electrical system was not the source. He had built it himself to code, and then some. He had inspected every connection. He had used appropriate materials for every component. The electrical system in that shed was better than the electrical system in most commercial buildings he worked in. He told the fire investigator this. The fire investigator, a thorough professional who took Tommy's expertise seriously because Tommy clearly had it, conducted a thorough investigation. The investigation took approximately 2 weeks. The investigation's conclusion was that the fire had been deliberately set. The origin point was identified at the exterior of the structure at the rear, near the base of the back wall. The burn pattern was consistent with an accelerant having been applied to the exterior siding and ignited. The fire had started on the outside and worked its way in, not the pattern of an electrical fire originating from within. Arson. Tommy's workshop shed had been deliberately burned. Tommy filed a police report. He called his insurance company. He called a public adjuster to help manage the insurance claim. He called his attorney, a woman named Judith who had handled some of his business contracts over the years. And then he started thinking. He thought about Vivian. He thought about the mediation outcome and the quality of reluctant compliance in her approval. He thought about the 7 months of silence that had followed the shed's completion. He thought about the fact that Thursday night, the night of the fire, was the night of the monthly Ridgewood Commons HOA board meeting, which ran from 7 to approximately 9 in the evening and which Vivian always attended and always chaired. He thought about the fact that 10:30 was approximately 90 minutes after the board meeting would typically have ended. He had no proof. He had nothing except a sequence of facts and a pattern and the specific instinct of a man who had been building things for 21 years and who had a very clear sense of what could and could not have caused the fire at his workshop. He called Judith the next morning. He described his thinking. He said he wanted to understand what his options were. Judith said they would need to let the investigation proceed. She said that if the investigation produced evidence pointing to a specific individual, the legal paths forward would become clearer. She said Tommy should document everything and stay calm and let the process work. Tommy said he intended to do exactly that. He also said he was going to rebuild the shed. Judith asked him why he was already thinking about rebuilding. Tommy said that was where the surprise was going to go. The arson investigation took place over approximately 6 weeks following the fire. Tommy cooperated fully with both the fire department's investigation and the police investigation that was opened when the fire was determined to be deliberately set. He provided every piece of documentation he had about the shed, the construction drawings, the materials documentation, the electrical inspection records, the architectural review approval, and the mediation outcome. He also provided something that he had not initially mentioned to the investigators because he had wanted to verify it first. Tommy had a security camera system. He had installed it approximately 3 months after completing the shed, not specifically because of the HOA situation, but as a general security measure for his property and for the protection of his business tools stored in the workshop. The system had 4 cameras covering the front of the house, the driveway, the backyard, and specifically the rear and sides of the workshop shed. The camera covering the rear of the workshop had captured footage from the night of the fire. The footage was dark, the yard not having exterior lighting in the immediate area of the camera's coverage. But the camera was a model with enhanced low-light capability, and the footage, while not as clear as daylight footage, captured something. A figure in dark clothing approaching the rear of the shed from the fence line at the back of Tommy's property at approximately 10:17 in the evening. The figure spent approximately 4 minutes at the rear of the shed. Then the figure moved back toward the fence line and disappeared from the frame. At 10:23, light was visible at the base of the rear wall of the shed. At 10:28, Denise called 911. The figure in the footage was not clearly identifiable from the footage alone. The low-light quality and the dark clothing obscured identifying features. But the figure's height and build and the specific way they moved when approaching the fence line was visible. The fire investigator and the police detective who reviewed the footage agreed that the footage was consistent with deliberate arson and that identifying the figure was a priority of the investigation. The investigation produced additional evidence through canvassing. A neighbor whose property backed up to the fence line at the rear of Tommy's yard had a motion-sensitive exterior light that had activated at approximately 10:15 on the night of the fire. The neighbor had looked out their window when the light activated and had seen a figure in dark clothing in the alley behind the properties. The neighbor had not thought much of it at the time because people occasionally walked in the alley, but they had seen the figure clearly enough to describe them, and the description included a specific detail. The figure had been carrying something that the neighbor described as a small container, the kind of container you might use for gasoline or lighter fluid. The neighbor's description of the figure's height and build was consistent with the security camera footage. It was also consistent with Vivian. The detective investigating the case interviewed Vivian. She was cooperative with the interview and denied any involvement in the fire. She had an alibi. She had been at the board meeting until approximately 9:15 and had then gone directly to a friend's home where she had remained until approximately 11. The friend confirmed this. The alibi was from 9:15 to 11. The fire had been set at approximately 10:17. The friend's home was approximately 12 minutes from Tommy's house. The alibi had a window. The detective submitted the case to the district attorney's office with a recommendation for further investigation. The DA's office reviewed the evidence and determined that while the circumstantial case was suggestive, it was not sufficient for a criminal charge at this stage. The evidence against Vivian was consistent with her having done it, but did not definitively exclude other possibilities. The case remained open. Tommy was not surprised by this. He had expected it to take time. He had expected the legal process to move at its own pace. He had not been counting on the legal process alone. He had been counting on the shed. Tommy was an electrician, 21 years of running a residential electrical contracting business. He understood systems. He understood how things worked and how they could be made to work in specific ways. He understood the relationship between what was visible and what was invisible, which is the fundamental technical understanding of electrical work, the wire in the wall, the current you cannot see, the consequence you feel. He had been thinking about the rebuilt shed since the morning after the fire. The thinking had been specific and methodical, the way an electrician thinks about a wiring problem, working through the components and the connections and the outcomes. He had consulted with several professionals over the months between the fire and the beginning of the rebuild. He had consulted with Judith about the legal dimensions of what he was planning. Judith had reviewed it and confirmed it was legal. She had said it was one of the more creative property improvement plans she had reviewed, but that it did not present legal problems. He had consulted with a contractor friend about the structural and mechanical aspects. The contractor had said it was straightforward from a building standpoint. He had consulted with 2 specialists whose specific expertise I am going to delay describing, because describing their expertise too early would reveal the surprise. He had consulted with his neighbor Pete, a retired software engineer who had a specific technical skill set that complemented Tommy's own. And he had consulted with Denise, who had listened to the complete plan and had said 3 words that Tommy told me were the most important approval he had received. She had said, "Do it, baby." The plan had several components. The first component was the physical rebuild. He was going to build the same shed. Same dimensions, 24 by 32 feet. Same exterior materials, vinyl siding matching the house. Metal roof in complementary charcoal. Same general layout. He was going to get the same architectural review approval he had received the first time, using the mediation outcome as precedent for the approval. He was going to rebuild exactly what had been burned. The second component was the electrical system. He was going to rewire the shed with the same professional installation as before, all the dedicated circuits and proper panels and code-compliant infrastructure. But this time, there were going to be additional circuits and systems that serve specific purposes beyond the standard workshop functions. The third component was what was going to go inside the shed that had not been in the first shed. The fourth component was the timing. The surprise was not something that would be immediately apparent. It would become apparent gradually, over a period of weeks, as conditions developed. He submitted the rebuild application to the Architectural Review Committee in February, approximately 4 months after the fire. He cited the previous mediation outcome as establishing the acceptability of the design. The committee approved the application within the standard review period. Vivian signed the approval as board president. She signed the approval for the shed she had burned down, rebuilt identically, with something different inside it. Tommy began construction in March. The rebuild took 8 weeks. Tommy oversaw every aspect of it with the specific attention of someone who was building something that was going to do more than hold tools. The exterior of the rebuilt shed was identical to the original. An observer standing in the backyard would see the same vinyl-sided structure with the same charcoal metal roof and the same proportions and the same window placement as the shed that had been there before the fire. There was nothing visible from the outside that indicated any difference between the original shed and the rebuilt one. The interior, however, was different in several significant ways. The workshop area in the front 2/3 of the shed was essentially the same. Tool storage, workbenches, dedicated electrical circuits, climate control, all the professional workshop infrastructure that Tommy needed for his business. The rear third of the shed, approximately 10 feet deep by 24 feet wide, was a different kind of space. This area was constructed with additional insulation beyond what a standard workshop required. The climate control system had a dedicated zone for this area with independent temperature and humidity controls. The lighting in this area was on a separate circuit and was specifically designed for the purpose the space was going to serve. This area was a specialized environment, the specific kind of environment that a very specific type of living thing required to thrive. I'm going to pause here and tell you what the surprise is. Not because you have not earned it, you have been patient, but because the story from this point forward requires you to understand what was in the shed to understand why it was so perfectly devastating. Tommy had built a bat habitat, a professional, purpose-built bat habitat, designed in consultation with a wildlife biologist from the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency and a bat conservation specialist from a regional environmental organization. Built to Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency specifications for a protected bat roosting structure, housing a colony of little brown bats, Myotis lacifugis, one of the most common and most protected bat species in Tennessee. Tommy had invited the bats in. He had provided them a home. He had built the habitat to the specifications required for it to qualify as a protected wildlife habitat under Tennessee law. And the bats had come. By the time the shed was completed and the habitat was established and the bat colony had taken up residence, Tommy's rebuilt workshop shed was simultaneously a licensed professional workshop and a protected wildlife habitat housing approximately 340 little brown bats. Little brown bats are protected under Tennessee state law. They are also federally protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Their roosts, once established, are legally protected from disturbance or destruction. Destroying a bat roost, even a roost in a private structure, without proper permits and mitigation procedures, is a violation of both Tennessee state law and federal law. The penalties for destroying a protected bat roost are significant. Criminal penalties under the Federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act can include up to 6 months in prison and fines of up to $15,000 per violation. State penalties under Tennessee law are additional. The legal process required to legally remove a bat colony from a structure involves extensive permitting, environmental review, and mitigation requirements that could take months and cost thousands of dollars. You cannot simply remove a bat colony. You cannot destroy the structure housing it without going through a legal process. You cannot touch the roost without authorization. 340 little brown bats in a shed that Vivian had already burned down once. If she burned it down again, she would not just be committing arson. She would be committing federal wildlife crimes. Tommy had turned his shed into a fortress that was more legally protected than any document or fence or security system could make it. The Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency requires that property owners who have established bat roost structures notify the agency of the roost's existence for documentation purposes. Tommy filed this notification approximately 6 weeks after the shed was completed and the bat colony was confirmed to be established. The notification was acknowledged by the agency, and the roost was added to the state's Protected Habitat Registry. He also notified his homeowner's insurance company of the new structure's dual-purpose nature and its status as a protected wildlife habitat. This notification was required under his policy terms and produced an interesting consequence. His insurance adjuster noted that the protected wildlife habitat status created additional liability considerations for anyone who might disturb the structure. He then did something that Judith had reviewed and approved, and that produced the most immediate and most satisfying single reaction in this entire story. He sent a notification to the Ridgewood Commons HOA. The notification was a formal letter written by Judith, addressed to the HOA board and to Vivian specifically in her capacity